Right. Okay, so it's recording, that's good.
So
we'll just wait for everyone to join. So just give them a few minutes, as is customary on webinars. No one is apart from us. So once we focus it in, we'll just carry on.
Hi Ian, hi Keith. Just giving everybody a couple of minutes, just for anyone else to join. Hi Wilson.
Some familiar names. All right, let me just give it one more minute for any sort of latecomers, and then Daryl and I will crack on. Right. I think we're probably at a reasonable quorum here, Daryl. So let's kick this webinar off. Good afternoon, everybody. Whilst we're still 116 days away from lockdown officially ending, fortunately, you don't have to wait for our webinar, because that's what we're doing right now for you. A quick introductions from our side. Luke Pelham, Head of Sales for Spike 95. Daryl, just want to give a quick intro?
Yeah, sure. Afternoon, everyone. I'm Daryl Kennedy, one of the directors of Spike. I've worked in IT for 25 years, 20 years of that as consultancy. First re-platforming project goes back to 2000, so the world and technology has moved on considerably since then. So, yeah.
Cheers, Daryl. Thanks for that. So both Daryl and I have really been looking forward to this webinar around how you deliver your re-platforming program at pace and on budget. And this should give you the chance to learn some new things, reinforce good practice, and take away some key insights. As always, got any questions, drop them in the Q&A down at the bottom, and we'll answer at the end. But just want to move on, Daryl.
Yeah.
Thank you.
There you go.
You're done. Fab. So for those of you that aren't familiar with Spike, I just wanted to give you a quick overview so you'd understand the context of where we're coming from and why we're being relied upon by so many organizations to help them deliver more revenues, better customer experience, and capture more wallet share than ever before. And I'll start with a quote from a recent customer of ours. "You're the experts that we need to make this happen." And in the context of that conversation, we're working with them on implement big re-platforming program. It's going to land this year. And this program is expected to generate billions new revenues and pivotal really to engaging new customers whilst enchanting and delighting their existing customer base as well. And we do this by being the experts. Steve Jobs once said, don't hire smart people and tell them what to do. You hire smart people when they tell you what to do. And that's kind of our mantra, really. We do this by being the experts. And we're strongest in that retail section. That's where our pedigree lies, and landing big change with confidence, so that a customer doesn't end up with a disaster headline in tomorrow's news. Just move on, Daryl, for us.
Yeah, sure.
So for this session, there's 4 key takeaways. All right. One, why starting left is absolutely critical to delivering change with confidence. I'm minded of someone once said to me, hope is not a strategy, and that's very eminent for this. Takeaway number 2 is what you need to measure to know where you are and where you're going, so you can change course correctly if required and on the right information, right data points. The third takeaway, you'll get some experience from our work with a British retailer on what has been called the single most complex Salesforce Commerce Cloud mission ever. And lastly, you'll get the ability to access our Success Readiness tool. And that'll allow you to measure your own programs so you can get a kind of baseline on where that program is and what you might need to be concentrating on. Just move on for us, Daryl. Thank you. So everyone loves a stat, right? Which is why we always start with stats. Just putting this into context, we all experienced the fallout from COVID, particularly around where projects and programs got stopped, got paused, because rightly so, the priorities from businesses and individuals, people, changed because of this, because of the pandemic. But in our experience now, at the turn of this new year, we're seeing a big shift. We're seeing a lot more companies embarking on ambitious of change in really aggressive timescales. And this is where these stats start to paint a picture of potential problems unfolding. So, with 1 in 3 IT projects being successful and actually 1 in 5 being complete disasters, there's a question to ask. Why is this? Just go back up again, please, Darryl. Thanks.
Yeah, sorry, PowerPoint seems to have a mind of its own and just seems to be jumping.
It's quite in keeping with IT failure, and then we have one, so that's fine. So we know that these projects and programs fail. We've all experienced and been in projects and programs that have been cold. And over the next few slides, we'll outline our experiences as to some of the causes for these issues. We'll just move on now, Daryl, thanks. We wouldn't have got this live without you. Now, I love this quote from the head of digital product at a British retailer. It's heartfelt, right? And she knew before we got engaged, she knew she was going to end up with an absolute disaster that she was going to have to manage and own from this re-platforming program. And without our support, without our coaching and cajoling them and delivering key outcomes, personally, I think this would have ended up as a bad news story in the press. It was going so badly. And we'll give a bit more colour to that in this next slide and the background to this re-platforming program. So this is our first key takeaway for you today. The story behind the single most complex Salesforce Commerce Cloud implementation ever. Right, and this was at a British retailer, and I'm pretty confident that you'll have bought a bike or some car parts from these folks at some point in your life, and that's really just to sort of press upon the scale of what we're talking about here. As a world-renowned author, Simon Sinek says, start with the why. So why was this retailer re-platforming their entire e-commerce platform? Soup to nuts. Simply put, they wanted to grow their business by exploiting it, increase that engagement with customers, and by having that better engagement, they were banking on this leading to up and opportunities across their products and services range. And given the importance of this program, it could not end up being a failed project, and becoming like one of the stats that I said earlier. The program itself was fairly typical in its nature. It was a vendor selected, so Salesforce selected for the platform after a rigorous tender process. The system integration partner appointed to architect and deliver the implementation. And then the internal teams were there to manage the program and be the business sign-off. However, where this really stands out is that the sheer level of customization put into that platform, into Salesforce Commerce Cloud, and while stripping away the legacy systems that were holding back, meant this was really complex, lots of moving parts that were all coming together at different times. And then add into the mix that this customer built their own integration layer to talk with Salesforce, and you're just adding lots and lots of risk into one program. This led to problems, as you'd expect. And some of the biggest problems we faced was that the scope kept changing due to lack of governance and assurance across the program. And this created kind of a hotbed of moving, constantly moving change. Your target was constantly moving. How do you hit that? And it was hard to get that end-to-end view. I mean, in addition, another thing that was worrying at the time, concern, was that the system integrator were left to their own devices. So, you know, it's a classic case of tail wagging a dog. So how do you even start to bring order to this type of chaos, right? So firstly, we looked at how do we get this landed, you know, start with the end in mind, so we could replan the key activities that needed to get this done. And in parallel, we'll get under the hood of kind of the key issues and problems and implemented standard ways of working. You know, for example, excuse me, defects were managed in multiple applications, multiple instances. So there was triaging and fixing those defects ended up being like a game of whack-a-mole. You know, you'd hit one down and three would pop up from somewhere else. Very difficult to manage. And probably the single most important thing that we gave this customer was that governance and assurance across the program. So the key business sponsors and stakeholders could understand where they were in terms of risk and make informed decisions off the back of it. So what that ended up doing was kind of nailing the scope, you know, making that target rigorous, and everything outside of that was put into a bucket list. And this then gave me the ability to sign off on that. And prior to this, what we found was that the program team would just say yes a lot to the business, and it would be like, okay, someone's dreamed up, they want me in green instead of blue, and I added into the change log, and that's very hard to manage when that's constant. So the key takeaways in terms of, you know, what we helped make happen with this client was implementing that governance and assurance across the program, you know, keeping that rigor in there, starting left. So we've brought in quality early doors to help inform that decision making. And we've all been there with programs where testing is done at the end, it's squeezed, it then gets made out to be the bad person or the bad part of the program, and blame culture starts. Driving quality early left, starting left, is absolutely critical. And Daryl will go on to that a little bit, or a lot of it, as he's flicking through all the slides.
Sorry, PowerPoint's just going crazy. I don't know why.
All right, fab. Having a single version of the truth, that single point of truth, and having the right things measured is really important. And then last but by no means least, so I'm going to hand over to Daryl to go into more of the specifics and add some more colour on some of the next takeaways. Or flip through loads of slides again.
I honestly don't know why it's doing that. Apologies, everyone. It just seems to have an absolute mind of its own. Let me just kill the share and then see if I can start it again.
Reboot and yell, yeah?
Yeah, exactly. Apologies for that.
Still doing it?
It's just going crazy.
Right, so as is typical with these things, you know, often you get technical issues on a webinar, and Zoom seems to be having a bit of a moment with PowerPoint for whatever reason. No doubt we'll file a error log to Microsoft as a follow-up.
And whatever I do, it just skips past all of the slides.
Wow.
I've never ever seen that before.
If anyone wants to put in questions as to how you stop that happening, it would be greatly appreciated. You got something on? Take the use timings off, Daryl, on that. Good, go for it. Your time to shine.
Is that still? Can you see that? Is that still sharing?
Yeah, it's all good.
Okay. Right. Apologies for that. Yeah, it seems our PowerPoint remembered our prep session from earlier, and as I started the slides, as I was sharing the slides 15 minutes before we started the webinar, it included all that, and decided that was the end of our presentation. So yeah, user error there. So anyway, Moving on, thanks Luke. So I'm going to open with our 4 guiding principles. We use these to help determine readiness when we're looking at any new replatforming program. These feature in more detail a little bit later on as part of our assessment calculator. So I'm only going to call out just a couple of examples for now. Start early and move fast. So this is all about clear comms, tight contracted deliverables needed to drive the scope, timing, quality gates and governance. Getting the heavy lifting done early, agreeing working approach, and then mobilizing quickly. Keep the scope tight, minimize customization and reduce complex configurations. I've certainly worked on a number of projects in the past where the complexities around the configuration seem to well outweigh the complexity of the actual code itself. And there was more delays and more problems where the complexity, the configurations weren't tracked, and yeah, ended up in quite an interesting state, to be honest. But yeah, more on that over a beer. Get a clear view of legacy change happening in parallel. In many cases as well, it's not an entire platform of everything all encompassing. There's always legacy layers that need to talk to new platforms. And these things are challenging enough without trying to hit a moving target that we don't have sight of. So understanding how the ground's moving beneath us is really, really key. Clearing the landing strip. So this is creating a clear path to live and know how you'll land this, which we'll cover in a slide or two, which you've probably already seen 5 times now. Make early decisions on big bang switchovers or parallel running to manage old and new worlds. And finally, building for the future. So focus on landing projects and avoiding huge mountains of technical debt. And finally, create reusable, maintainable assets that can be used in testing later on. Scope, responsibility and independence. So on any replatforming program, there are many activities to be done. This just provides a high level example with just 3 different sort of responsible parties. You, the client, your integrator and your technology partner. There are numerous ways this can be divided up, but you as the client must define the scope and the responsibility and own acceptance of this at the end of the program, and do all the necessary sign-offs. It's your system, it's your platform at the end of the day. The sort of 2 key sections in the middle, the black and the blue puzzle pieces, this is where you've got different options. So all in-house is always an option to you, but this will always heavily rely on skills, capability, availability of key people. It can be wholly outsourced to an integrator or a mixture of technology partners. So over the years, what our experience tells us is that programs operating with just a single integrator interfacing directly back into the client are the ones that experience the most pain. Too much goes unmanaged, untracked, unmeasured, and all of this drastically impacts quality and ultimately timelines and budget. An additional technology partner provides the necessary independence to surface these issues much earlier in the program. On several projects and programs, including the one that Luke talked about earlier, we've been engaged far too late in the day, and it's such a time-sapping exercise to get everything back on track. And Luke, a key point Luke called out earlier about the tail wagging the dog, and it must be absolutely clear where roles and responsibilities lie, and ultimately who's marking the homework. What we've illustrated here is certainly an approach that we recommend. It provides the necessary independence, and it also provides that all-important sort of final quality gate before anything's a candidate for release or production. So, traditional challenges, what to avoid and why. So this is a fairly simple indicative illustration of a program of work that's carved out into a Gantt view. It's a fairly typical timeline for an average replatforming journey. I think we're all well aware by now of the DevOps infinity loops and starting early to maximize productivity. But surprisingly or unsurprisingly, as the case is probably, that programs still run in this way. they're just an accident waiting to happen. And what we've highlighted here in red are just a couple of call outs to help illustrate when the problems are going to occur and why. So the sort of shaded area on the left, starting left, we can clearly see that there's a huge amount of lost time, value and quality in that space there over those sort of first 6 months. There's way too many assumptions that are going to be baked in there, and the gap is just too wide between the January inception and then when we start ascertaining quality in July. From July through to September, another point that Luke called out earlier, at best we can describe this as a hope strategy. We know that delivery is going to be late, it's going to be problematic, deadlines are going to move. We're going to get into a situation where releases are containing more defect features than any useful new products or features included in them. And this is ultimately where project purgatory sets in. Whenever we do reach the flag at the end of the program of work to actually get it into production, what happens then? A transition or a transformation into some typical or some form of agile working seems to be the theme at that point, with no real understanding of how this will work in practice. By this time, we've got hundreds of poor assets that are created in very, very hectic testing phases. We've got missing, incomplete documentation and extremely poor knowledge gaps. And essentially, we end up with a huge pile of technical debt that moves us into a business as usual operation. So we don't give ourselves, it's not setting out on a good footing that, business as usual running is then effectively having to deal with 12 months worth of sort of pain and problems, as well as all the shiny new functionality that the business were promised as soon as it goes into production. So what's our alternative? So in our second takeaway, what we're looking at here is a starting left model. Down the left-hand side, you see all of the good things around project backlogs, all the team backlogs, features, stories, tasks, defects, all of those good things. The two bars that you can see along the top here, these are our two quality gates moving into live. We've got all of our 4 teams sprinting left to right at a pretty steady pace and cadence. And then below that, what we've then got is a legacy tier where changes are moving a little bit slower. We've used approaches like this on many, many different projects, working with a number of clients. One size doesn't fit all. It's a model, and the one thing that needs to happen is, this needs to be tailored to the specific needs and circumstances of that particular client, the technology stacks, the teams involved, and everything that goes along with that. So as I say, it highlights a model. But what it does show is the ability to release quality code to production at different cadences through the same repeatable and consistent process time after time. What it gives you, teams working as trains with CI gated releases, taking feedback from those automated tests. So we're getting fast feedback loops back to the developers. And this does take time. I mean, especially when you're trying to retrofit it, trying to re-engineer all this in at the end of a huge painful program like was illustrated on the previous slide. It's absolutely not going to happen overnight. So time does need to be taken on that. Again, there's sort of 2 bars along the top that you can see there. It's highlighting that both automation and performance are included as part of the automation and the dynamic checks that are done. It gives us the ability to manage both simple and complex change. You can see up through these dotted lines here, if it's a simple change, it can bypass the performance testing and go straight through all the functional testing. So it sort of caters for both. The legacy bar at the bottom that we talked about alleviates the challenges arising from teams operating at different cadences, maturity levels, or even as the example there, the legacy code. And finally, mitigating risk to live releases. especially where they're challenging ones and they need coordination and there's maybe multiple facets to them, where there's back-end changes, there's front-end changes, and what we can start to do here is deploy things into production, have things feature switched off, and then when all the code's there and it's all married together, then we can start enabling and switching that functionality on. So, sorry, I've got two notes there for some reason. So, measuring for success. So this is the final slide from me, and it's our penultimate takeaway, and it brings together the vitally important role that metrics play. One example that clearly sticks in my head is the fact that you can land an aeroplane in near zero visibility, for the simple reason that you've got all the necessary information at hand to do so. I can count on many hands the amount of times that decisions are made on projects for the exact opposite reason. You know, flying by seats of pants or going with gut instincts or things like that. That, you know, there's that old adage and that cliche that if you can't measure it, then you absolutely can't manage it. And yeah, probably going back about 12, 13 years, but I remember working on a project in Manchester, and there was no measurements, no metrics or anything in place. So over the course of a couple of weeks, we pulled all these together, you know, re-architected certain things to give us these measurements and measures, and we showed them to the sort of stakeholders and project teams, and they were absolutely amazed by these things in terms of comments like, "Oh, these metrics are really useful." It's like, how were you managing your projects before? I mean, what were you using to determine if it was ready to go? I don't know. Hen's teeth? I don't know. Anyway, so as you all well know, you know, there's literally hundreds of thousands of metrics that can be measured. So I'm only going to call out a few here. So visibility, the key thing here is ensuring that the right people have the right information all of the time. And there's no reason why this can't be on demand or at their fingertips. You know, not everybody's waiting at 9 o'clock on Friday morning for that email to arrive in. You know, a lot of information is needed on Tuesday afternoons, Wednesday mornings, and so on. So allowing people to self-serve and grab that information from central pool saves a lot of time. Visualizing metrics and having them on display in TV screens, single source of truth, like Luke mentioned earlier. I mean, another example from a project that I worked on where there was displays in all corners of the office. There was all these graphs and charts and all these colors telling you all sorts of wonderful things, but none of them were actually actioned and none of them were followed up. So every morning I used to come in, and the sort of first monitor that I saw past the door, I'd look at all of the regression packs that were running in earlier environments, and I could almost put my mortgage on before I opened that door that X number of those would be read, and it was pretty much the same thing every day. So it's like, why are we running these? Why are we reporting on them? And why are we wasting the electricity to put them on the TV when, yeah, clearly nothing's been done with them? So as I say, it's key to use the information and make sure you act on that. Governance, quality gates with the necessary early collaboration. What we don't want is to create divides between teams. We want to make sure that these processes are known by everybody and there's plenty of time in between. So plenty of collaboration and early discussions, that no black boxes, no surprises, that we absolutely know that when we're coming up to quality gates or those sort of key decision points, that all of the right things have been done, all of the right information has been provided, and there's absolutely no surprises. Code and code quality. So for me, this isn't just the application itself. This is also all of the This is also all of the test code as well. All the modern automation tooling and technologies and languages used can quite easily be parsed and scanned and checked in the same ways that application code can be done. Looking for duplication to remove problems later on with higher maintenance, poorly written code, poorly written methods, classes, all those kind of things. And then the sort of final box at the bottom around tooling. Traceability is key, and we make sure that we're actually able to trace tests and problems all the way back to requirements. We're not just talking at widgets or numbers. We're sort of saying that, you know, this particular piece or this particular process isn't working for these reasons, and talking in a business language that everybody understands. The ability to audit tests and make sure that everything is clearly visible by anybody that wants to see it, and that gives you such a great reference point that you can look back and say, you know, at this particular day, in this particular environment, these issues were introduced, and a lot of the root cause and fault finding can be really simplified by doing things like that. And then the final one from me is, you know, making sure that all the modern tooling, all the modern monitoring, and all those things are in place that give you what you need. You know, there's so many situations where one team is monitoring something, that's a black box, they don't share and pass information. Develop a unit test, they don't get seen, and that's done by another team and we don't get to see that. You know, there's absolutely no reason why that shouldn't be the case. So yeah, you know, that links strongly to the first point for me, that ensure that all the people have the right information that they need at the right time. Okay.
Cool.
Okay. Luke, if I can hand back to you at that point, and then last couple of slides before we jump to questions.
Fabulous, thanks, Darryl. So as the fourth and final takeaway from this webinar, I said right at the beginning, we're giving you access to our success readiness calculator. And that gives you the ability to measure your programs using our 4 guiding principles that Darryl outlined earlier. It just gives you a snapshot, you know, where are you at that point in time? So if we look at that sort of diagram on the right hand side, there's kind of like corresponding points of measures. So the points number 1 really relate to how well placed you are to start early and move fast. And points number 2 relating to the scope and keeping it tight. Points number 3 about clearing that landing strip, making sure you've got your path alive, that you can get this thing out and done. And then the points that are numbered 4 are around building out for the future, you know, not having that technical debt, not having that person on the program walk off the team with all the knowledge in their head. So just looking at this example, graded 0 to 3. So in this example, it's really clear and very obvious that there's some work to be done, particularly around, you know, keeping that scope tight. Some elements of clearing that landing strip to make it good to push that change out into production, and then really about understanding that technical debt, that building for the future. So just move on for us, Darryl.
Yeah, sure.
That's it.
We'll move on now after going.
Yeah, okay, so we're not flipping through 20 slides in 5 seconds. So what we learned today, well, hopefully you've learned how to take off the timings off of dress rehearsal on a PowerPoint slide. That's a bonus one for you all. But really, just 4 key takeaways, just to reiterate why, you know, starting left is critical to giving you the ability to control and govern the quality throughout making informed business decisions as to, you know, what's going to go live. You know, takeaway number 2 is measuring the right things continuously, and using these measures and this data to give you the right information around risks and issues. You've got a little bit of a snapshot into a program of work that we did as a 3rd takeaway for a British retailer. And there's probably quite a few familiar takeaways from that experience, as we've all been on those types of programs. You know, and that really is, you know, that Salesforce Commerce Cloud implementation is not to be understated. It's a big platform in its own right, but then to customize it to death and then move other things in with it and build your own integration layer was a lot of change to push through a very, very tight funnel. And lastly, as I've just shown you, post this webinar, you'll get a link to our success readiness calculator, so you can self-serve, have a quick snapshot of your programs. Just move on first, Darryl. And just lastly, because I'm conscious we lost a few minutes with some technical hitches, it's a call to action. So Darryl and I have been talking at you for about 25 minutes or so, and there should always be something that you should now go and do. So literally, some point after this webinar, you'll get an email with a link to the Success Readiness Calculator. Go and use it, go and play with it, go and use it on projects that you've got now, programs you've got now, or future-based ones, and see how you stack up. If you've got some concerns, reach out to us, come and have a chat. We'll listen, we'll try and understand the problem, and we'll give you our kind of best guidance. You know, what that could lead to is some quick wins, some things to do early, that avoids pain later down the line, and help you around that decisioning on how you're going to land, you know, your overall change program. So that's the call to action. Get on with it. Questions and answer. I mean, look, firstly, from Daryl and I, thank you. You know, it's been a lot of fun with, despite the technical hitches, and I hope it's been of some use to you. You know, there's yeah, it's all right. You're beer fighting on this one, Daryl. As is customary, we kind of open floor to questions, but as would have it, fortunately, we've got a few questions just prior to the webinar, because we asked, you know, send your questions pre. And there's a few questions here which we'll just sort of go through, and Daryl, I'll throw them over to you, where I think it's more appropriate. It's of a technical nature. So someone asked, are off-the-shelf software as a service, platform as a service, e-commerce platforms more popular than open source or in-house developed? And that's a pretty interesting question, because depends, right? We're not 100% sure about this. What we do know is that, like, in the instance of Salesforce, you know, they've got like 4,000 live sites across the globe, and that's keying into that, you know, speed to market is more relevant than ever. All right, so going down that SaaS route does kind of make sense to us. Someone's asked, in terms of test automation, how much should you automate at the UI paired to API? Daryl, that's for you.
The APIs are always sort of faster. The tests run a lot quicker. They're less brittle than the UI. There's a lot more that you can do in a very, very short space of time. And certainly modern platforms, modern solutions, and modern technology enable you to do that. Also depends on what sort of business questions you're trying to answer as well. Now, you always need to do some UI testing to make sure that everything's wired together and everything's flowing and everything works from the UI as well as the API. I'm not sure I could give you an exact percentage. I think everybody's probably familiar with the typical automation pyramids, that the UI tests are slower, they take longer to run, they're brittle. You know, you're going to be in a world of pain to maintain them, but you know, they have their place. And you know, there are still some technologies and some architectures out there where you don't have the option to do API tests. So you know, hopefully this is about replatforming and things moving forward, then that should obviously not be the case. But yeah, you'd probably be looking at an arbitrary sort of 70-30 or something like that, I would say, in favor of API tests taking up the majority of it.
Fair enough. Roy's asked in the channel, and it's actually kind of interrelated with a question that someone sent in prior. So Roy's question was, hi guys, did you find running perf tests in between sprints in Salesforce domain not easy? I think the answer to that is yes, that was kind of challenging, to be honest with you. Somebody had asked in relation to this, you know, how critical is load and performance testing for SaaS e-commerce platforms? I can have a half stab at this, but Daryl will take over when I start floundering. I mean, you know, in our experience, performance can be easily overlooked, you know, particularly when you're moving to SaaS or PaaS. You kind of getting assurances from the vendor that everything's going to be fine and loads fine. We tested to death before we gave it to you. So it's really good to check the kind of SLAs that the vendors put in place. The reality is the real performance risk comes in when it's in your estate, you know, and integrating into your legacy back-end systems. And that's really where you're going to start. You know, you've got the new front end calling onto the back end. If you're not fixing the back end as well, then all you're doing is creating a bow wave and bottlenecks that is going to cause you some pain somewhere down that software development life cycle, and maybe even manifesting in terms of customer experience. So another thing to key into this is obviously performance. And we find this now with conversations, or have done for years, many conversations with retailers, is even the finance team care about performance. You know, it used to be a bit of a dark art, but now they understand that performance is 100% directly related to revenues, and that gets everybody very interested. So if the site is performing slowly, as we said in a previous webinar around page speed, page load time, customers get turned off by it. You know, after 3 seconds of waiting, they're going to go to your rival. If you haven't got the functionality or products, or you can't easily find things, they're going to go somewhere else in an online experience, and that leads to, loss in revenue, loss in opportunities to capture new clients or to bring them into your into your brand.
Add on to that.
Anything to add?
What you say about SLAs and things like that is that the only thing that you would ever get, it doesn't matter what's written on the tin in terms of this platform supports this many users, because it's customizable and it's tailorable. So depending on who has done the engineering, what they've done, how they've wired it, how they've coupled it, what queries they've written, how efficient or inefficient they are, front end, middle end, back end, that you're not going to get any guarantees. So you always need to do something because it's unique to you. It fits into your estate, your back end application. So there's way too many variables to say, platform as a service, something like, Office 365. Yeah, all right. You can pretty much take that as read, that's going to be fine because it's a cookie cooker, isn't it? Everybody's kind of using the same thing, but yeah, platforms and of this scale, way too complex not to do it.
Yeah, no, I agree. It's that customization, moving from vanilla to what serves your business purpose best. We're having a conversation with a retailer at the moment who are trying to scale back that change of scope, but reality is they're not going to change their business to fit the platform. The platform's got to change to fit their business or some kind of halfway house. Another question, I'm just conscious of time, and I think we'll make this the last question, and we'll circulate out questions and answers latterly. So something, again, pre-emailed in, for the end-to-end testing, including, no doubt, numerous legacy connected systems, did you find product data to be a challenge? So you got an answer for that one, Daryl?
Yes is the answer.
Okay, a bit more, any more than that, or?
It's always an absolute challenge, isn't it? That, what language is your new platform talking versus what your old one was talking? How is information stored in your other platforms? How many different SKUs can old platforms take versus new platforms? That you're really not interfacing a square peg into a square hole there. That the age of it, there's so many things that you would struggle to recreate in test that actually lives in live, and so on and so forth. So yes, there's problems. Yes, there's an extreme array of challenges around it. And like any sort of project, that you have to go through all of that and understand, what the old platforms, what the new platforms look like, how much information is needed, how you even source this, because you're trying to build simulations of this, both from an automation and performance on scale. So understanding, the minimum amounts necessary to flow through all of the systems in the right order before you start ramping that up. So yeah, data is absolutely paramount and absolutely key.
Yeah, I think it ends up being, it can be a killer very quickly. I think one of our colleagues said, actually, it's good to take a kind of fresh cut from prod as much as you can, so you've got the environments replicating, the reality, and actually back to that customer British retailer that we went, that was something that they fundamentally did wrong as well, as they were looking at data as it's test environment only. So when they went to put it live, unsurprisingly, it didn't react as it should have done in their test environments. And you think, well, you need to use production.
Yeah. Anyone that's worked in our space for as long as we all have, I think everybody will have a number of sort of war stories and things like that. We could hold a webinar, I think, just separately on data and war stories.
Yes. I think we'll call it an end there, Daryl, because there were a few more questions, but like I said, in the follow-up, we'll send them around with our thoughts and our answers and curate that. And also, obviously, there'll be a link to the Success Readiness Calculator. So, thanks from me.
Thank you, everyone,
for your time, and hopefully we'll see you all soon.
Enjoy the rest of your days. Have nice weekends. Thanks, everyone.
Cheers then. Bye now.
Bye for now.